day everyone, welcome to the course on next generation sequencing technologies, data analysis and applications. We have started discussing the mapping algorithms, and we have talked about BLAST, etc., and their limitations. In the last class we have talked about the hash table based mapping algorithms, and we have seen hash table based mapping algorithms are really fast, but they require a lot of memory, and also they have problem with mapping to repeat sequences. Okay. So, in this class we will be talking about suffix tree based mapping algorithm, and we will talk about how this algorithm can circumvent some of the issues of the hash table. Okay, so, this is the agenda for this class. So, we will talk about suffix tree based mapping algorithm, and then we will talk about suffix array based mapping algorithm. Okay, so, we will talk about what is suffix, what is suffix tree, suffix array, etc., and then we will see how we can map reads to the reference sequence using these methods. Okay, so, these are the keywords we will come across: suffix, tree and array. So, just to briefly recap, in the last class we have talked about hash table based mapping algorithm, and we have seen this is a very fast mapping process because we are storing this hash table in the memory and we can search very efficiently. Now, hash tables require a lot of memory, right. So, we have talked about 12 to 15 GB of space for storing, for example, human genome hash table. And what we have also seen is that speed of mapping is reduced if you are mapping reads to repeat sequences, right. So, if you have multiple mappings across the genome, the speed is reduced because you need to extend this seed and stitching process for multiple regions, right. So, this actually takes more time. So, is there any alternative strategy, right? So, one of the things that researchers have come up with is something like a data structure that can handle mapping to repeat sequences. So, at least we can address the issue of this mapping to repeat sequences. Okay. And these are the structures suffix trees and suffix arrays, and these have been used in pattern searching, data mining, etc., beforehand. So, how does this work? Okay. And we will now discuss this slowly, right, step by step, and we will build these suffix trees and then suffix arrays, and we will see how we can search very efficiently using these data structures. Okay. So, what we do is we convert the reference sequence into a suffix tree. We will see in a moment how we do that. And what we will see also is that repeat sequences are represented by overlapping paths in the tree. Okay. So, which means mapping reads to repeat sequences becomes very efficient. Okay. And then we search reads to the suffix tree. Again, we will discuss this in much more detail as we go along. So, to start with, what is a suffix? Okay. So, a suffix is a substring of a string that starts at any position in the string, but ends at the end of the string. Okay. So, let us take some examples and then I think it would be clear. So, here is a string, right, it is shown here in your screen, ACG, ACC, AGG, ATC, right, and here are some examples of suffixes. Okay. So, we have GATC or the one below, and you can see they can start at any position in the string, but they should end at the end of the string, right. So, it should end with this ATC, right. So, it ends here at the end of the string. Okay. So, that is why these are suffixes. But the one example below here, right, this one is not a suffix, right. Why? Because this does not end at the end of the string, right. So, it ends at the T, that is not the end of the string. Okay. So, I hope this is clear now what is a suffix of a string. So, we can take a very quick example, right, and we can write down the suffixes of this string, right. So, we have this here. So, we can have what are the suffixes. So, we start with G, right, we have CG, SCG, right, GSCG and so on, right. So, you can write all of them, finally, the TT, AG, CG, SCG, right. So, these are the all possible suffixes of the string. Okay. So, this concept will be useful when you actually go for suffix tree construction. Now, the question is, what is a suffix tree, right? We understand what is a suffix of a string, but what is a suffix tree? Okay. So, this is a data structure and it contains something like we call root. So, it will have one root and it will have leaves, okay. And this is actually built, this data structure is built from the letters of a string, okay. So, let us go into that. So, what these three contain is paths from root to the leaves, right. So, we will in a moment we will see the structures how they actually look like and we will understand this better, okay. And these paths they correspond to the suffixes that exist in the string, right. So, we have seen all possible suffixes and we will have paths corresponding to each of these suffixes, okay. And all suffixes of the string will be represented by a path that will join the root and it will go to a leaf in that tree, okay. So, this will be the suffix tree and where all the suffixes of a string are represented, okay. Now, as you can probably understand, right, what we do is we take the genome sequence, reference genome sequence and we build the suffix tree out of that. And so, size of the tree is proportional to the size of the genome, right. If you have bigger genome, the suffix tree will be larger and also the time taken to build the tree, right, is also proportional to the size of the genome. As you can imagine, for bigger genomes you will have more number of suffixes, right, and it will take more time, right, to build the suffix tree. So, this is a kind of structure, right, that you will see when you build a suffix tree, right. You will have a root here, right, as you can see this is the root and you will have leaves, right. These are the leaves that you can see, these are marked with red arrows. So, these are all leaves and you have paths from the root to the leaves, okay. And all these paths represent the suffixes of a string, okay. So, now let us take an example, right. Let us take a reference sequence and let us build the suffix tree of that reference sequence and then we will understand this better, okay. So, how do you construct a suffix tree, right, and we will see this process in a moment, right. So, let us take this reference sequence and these are all the suffixes that are possible, right, from this reference sequence. I have just added hash at the end because it denotes the end of the string, okay. So, we can have them as the leaves and that will say okay, this is the end of the path, that we cannot go beyond that, okay. So, we will take all these suffixes and we will build the suffix string, okay. So, we start with this a hash, right, we start with the root, we have the base a, then we have the hash, right, and we have reached the leaf, okay. This is the end of this suffix, okay, end of the string. And then we take the next one which is the GA hash, right, this is again highlighted in green and we add this from like a root to a leaf, right. So, again it ends with this hash here, okay. So, and we have G and A in between and we can continue this process, we can do this for CGA, we can do this for GCGA, right. So, one of the things you probably will notice, right. So, for this one, right, CGA we have added this. Now, GCGA the first letter is G, right. So, G already exists, right, there is a path from the root to G. So, we will use that path and then we go and see, right, whether there is any C after the G. So, there is none. So, we have to construct a new path to get to the leaf, okay. And we can continue this process and we can generate the full suffix tree, okay. Now, we can also add the positions, right, that will denote where the suffix starts in the string, okay. So, if we say this is the position 1, right, then we can add these positions in at the leaf, right, saying so which will denote okay, this suffix starts at this position, okay. So, I will just write the positions here, right. You can see if you kind of tally with this, right. So, you will see this is the position for each of these suffixes, okay. So, this position actually helps us in finding the location, right. If we are searching now for reads in the reference sequence using this suffix tree, we know the location, okay, where this suffix actually starts, okay. So, we will take another example and we will do the suffix tree construction. This is slightly more complex example and as we will see when we go and build the suffix tree. So, as before we have now more number of suffixes, we need to consider all of them and we need to find paths, right, that go from root to leaf for each of these suffixes, okay. So, So, we can see, right, we will going in one step from there, but I will explain. Okay. So, again we do this step by step. So, we have the first the C, right, and then you have this path here from root to C, and then we have this hash, right. So, this suffix is now represented in the tree. We take the next one, right, root to C, this path already exists, right. So, and from there we take this C and hash, right. So, we have reached the leaf. So, this suffix is now also represented. The next we have is GCC, right. So, what we have is G, right, from root to G, then to C, right, and then through C here and then hash, right. This path represents this suffix. Then we have CGCC, right. So, one thing we have seen, right, this root to C path already exists, right, we will utilize that, but there is no C to G path yet. So, we will actually have to add that here, we will have to add that node here, and then we will add this G to C, C to hash, right. So, we have reached the leaf and this represents this suffix. Then we have this GC, GCC. Okay. Now, what we will see, right, from this root to G to C, this path already exists, right, and what we need to do, then we have to add a path to G, right, and then to C, and then we have reached the leaf. Okay. So, this way we can go on, right, for all of them we can do this and you will end up with a tree structure like this. Okay. You have to do this by hand. So, I will encourage you to take any example like this and do it yourself, and then you will understand the construction process. What you will see, like the first step is identify all the suffixes of a string and then generate this structure, right, this suffix tree structure, keeping this simple principle in mind, right. So, you should have a path that connects the root to the leaf and represent each of these suffixes, right. So, for each of these suffixes you will have a path in the tree. Okay. And as you can see, as you will see, like we have all the paths here. Okay. So, I hope this is clear. Now, we can do also add the positions again, right. If we consider this is the position 1, we can again add all these positions in the tree, and that will help us identify the location of the read, right, when you are doing the mapping. Okay. So, what we will now do is we will now also see, right, how we can actually compress the tree a little bit, and then we will see how we search for reads using this suffix tree structure. Okay. So, the first thing is we can compress the tree rather than this really elaborate display, right, of the whole thing. We can actually compress, right. So, for example, where we have just one path, for example, here we have only this one path, right. So, we can actually compress this into just double C, right, and we can this will look much simpler. And similarly, for here, right, this path here, this is a single path. So, we can just compress it, right, into this kind of thing. So, we can do this for, so I have done only for part of them, you can do for the whole tree like this, right. This becomes much more clear, right, it is a much clearer structure when you look at it. Okay. So, we will go back to the original tree and we will see how we can actually search for these reads using this suffix tree structure. Okay. So, that is what we are going to do. The steps are you start at the root and you start matching letters from the read, and you continue till the full read sequence has been found. Okay. So, this is very simple, right. We start at the root and we go on one by one and we start matching letters. Okay. So, let us take this example of GAG, okay, and we will try to identify this GAG here. Okay. So, here we have, right, we have this G, okay. You can see this green base, right. So, we start from the root and the first base we look at is G, and we see, okay, root to G there is a path. So, we are taking this. So, we have identified G, there is a match. Next base is A, right, and this is where we have the match, right, GA, and then the last base which is the G, and we have identified this G. Okay. So, we have identified or found the full string, right, full read in the suffix tree. So, this is the GAG. And once we have found, we can also look at the location, right, the position is 6th position, right, and if you go back to the original string, you will see, okay, this GAG occurs at the 6th position of the reference genome. Okay. So, it sounds very simple, right, the search process becomes very simple, and we will take now another example, and this is a slightly interesting example. We will see in a moment why that is the case. Okay. So, this example is GCG, we are now searching for GCG in the tree. Okay. We start at the root, the first letter is G, okay, and we have found this path here G. The next one is C, okay, and we have this G to C path here, and then the last letter is G and we have found G. Okay. Okay, so, you see we have found this GCG here. Okay. What about the location? Okay. So, one of the things you see is that this is part of two paths, right. So, we have one path going in this direction, another path going in this direction, and they are located in two different positions in the reference string, right. And what it means is that this sequence is repeated in the reference sequence, where when you construct the tree, they actually overlapping with each other, right, because of the structure, right. The structure is such that these repeat sequences will overlap. Okay. So, you can then identify, okay, there are two positions where we find this read matching position 4 and position 8, because we have two paths that are going through these nodes, right. So, GCG. Okay. So, what you see is that searching for repeat sequences is actually very easy in this kind of structure, right. So, you do not have to kind of worry about this repeating this process multiple times across multiple paths like we do in hash table based algorithms. Okay. So, we will take now another example, which is GTG, okay, and we repeat the same process. Okay. So, we will start with G, again taking from the root, and we come up to this point, right, but then we are stuck, right, because there is no T G to T path, right. So, the next letter is T and there is no path from G to T. So, there is no match in the tree. Okay. So, this is something that you probably then realize that this is a limitation of this kind of structure, right. So, it cannot actually identify any mapping if there is there is a mismatch in the read data. Now, you might say, okay, maybe we can circumvent in this way, some way, right. Maybe we can allow for certain mismatches and then see if there are other matches later on, etc. So, those can be done, right. So, for example, you can think that if you allow this, there is no T. So, maybe we can allow both these paths and we can say, okay, there is A and C, but after that we have G here, we also have G here, and these could be the matches, right. So, you can allow for mismatches. Now, this is something that can be done, but researchers have not kind of invested so much time and energy, because there are other limitations of suffix trees. So, which we will discuss now. So, what are the advantages of suffix tree based methods? So, what we have seen is that we can find matches very quickly. We have seen some very simple examples, and we can find multiple mappings or mapping to repeat sequences quite easily, right. It is very quick because of the specific data structure that you are using. This repeat sequences, the paths actually overlap in the tree, but there are major drawbacks, okay, and that is why we have not invested that much time or energy into developing this further, right. So, one is, of course, it requires a large amount of memory or storage, right, when you are generating this tree structure. So, it has been seen it takes about 30 to 35 GB space for human genome, right. So, this is something that you then cannot run on an ordinary laptop or desktop. You need specialized servers for doing this work. Okay. And another thing is the building the suffix tree, right. It is a very elaborate and complex data structure, and it is quite time consuming, but you can argue, right, okay, once you have built this for a specific reference sequence, you can store it and you can use it. But then the first drawback comes in, because it takes a lot of storage, right, to keep it in your hard drive. And what we have seen at the last is that it is also poor at handling mutations or sequencing errors, right. When there are mismatches, it cannot find those mappings, but then of course, we have discussed, right, we can perhaps design certain ways to circumvent this problem, but then because of the first two limitations, it is actually not worth it. So, can we reduce the amount of memory that we are using, right? Is there any way that we can actually reduce the memory usage, because this is a major limitation. Okay. So, can we address some of these drawbacks, and the first drawbacks especially, right. So, it turns out that there is a way, right, and it is through the use of suffix arrays. Okay. So, what are suffix arrays? So, this is again a set of suffixes of the genome that are sorted lexicographically. Okay. So, we will see again, take the examples and we will see how we actually build these suffix arrays. Okay. So, here is a reference string again, right, and we have the suffixes, all possible suffixes of that reference string, and we are also again denoting the end of the string by this hash sign, right, and we have written down all the suffixes here. So, if you remember the definition that we have just mentioned is that suffix array is requires lexicographical sorting, right, or alphabetical sorting, right. So, we sort these suffixes, right, lexicographically, and we also have the start positions, right. So, we can map the start position of each of these suffixes along with the suffix sequences, right, and then we can do a lexicographical sorting. Okay. So, this sorting is works in this way. If you are not familiar with lexicographical sorting, is that we first look at the first letter, right. So, let us see. So, here among all these suffixes we have this A comes first, right. So, these suffixes will come at the top, right, these will occur first, right. So, lexicographical order is A will come first, then it will be C, then it will be G, then it will be T, right. So, we start with that. So, we start with these suffixes that have A in the first place. Now, then if the first letter is same, then we look at the second letter. So, in this case this is G, this one is G here and this one is T, which means this one will come afterwards, right, AT. So, because T comes after G. Okay. Now, the second letter is also same for these two suffixes. We look at the third letter, so they are also same. Okay. We look at the fourth letter, then they are also same, G and G, and then we look at the fifth letter. Okay. And finally, we see this one has A and that one has C. Okay. So, which means lexicographically this one will be the first one, this will be the second one, and so on. Okay. So, this is how we do the sorting, right, and you will see this one will come first, this S C C G A G C G A, right, because of this occurrence of A. Then we have the other one that we have talked about, then we have the 81, right, and you understand why that is the case. We repeat this process for all the suffixes, right. So, then after A you have the suffixes that start with C, right, you can see here, and then we have the suffixes that start with G, right, and finally the suffix that starts with T. Okay. And again the principle same, if we look at the first letter, if it is the same we look at the second letter, if it is the same we look at the third letter, and so on, and then finally we sort them lexicographically, right. Somewhere it will be give you this difference and you can sort lexicographically. Now, once you sort this lexicographically, the sorted start positions also appear, right. So, you are also changing sorting the start positions and you get these sorted start positions. Now, what is the point of this sorting, right? Why do you do this sorting at all? Okay. Now, what happens is that now if you want to search for reads, it turns out that you can actually search for reads very efficiently through this sorted data structure. Okay. So, here are some points before we actually go to the search part, right. So, what we store is the suffixes, we do not store them, we only store the sorted start positions. Why that is the case? Because we can actually recover the suffix from its start position and the full reference genome sequence. Okay. So, if we know the start position, we can say okay, this is a suffix that we are working with, right. So, that is actually more efficient way of storing, right. So, we only store the positions and the reference genome sequence we have, and we can generate the suffixes whenever required. So, how do you actually search through these suffixes, right. So, we have these sorted suffix positions, right. So, we have this suffix array and this is the array which is only the positions, okay, and we do not store these suffixes in the data. Okay. Now, how do you actually search this read sequence? So, we have, this is a multi-step process, as we have first discussed the first step only. So, we actually generate suffixes from the position. So, once we have stored the suffix array and the genome sequence, we can generate the suffixes from the positions. We compare with read sequence, okay. We will see in how do you actually compare, and we do lexicographical sorting, right, as you have seen, and that makes the search process very efficient. Okay. So, again let us take an example, right, and that will be much easier to understand. Okay. So, let us take this read GCG. Okay. We have taken this example in case of suffix tree also, and let us see how we can find this GCG here. Okay. Okay. So, how do you actually search? Okay. So, what happens is that we can use some sort of search algorithms. This is something called a binary search. Okay. So, you can actually break down these arrays into two parts and then see whether this GCG part will be in this part on the other part, right. And if you see the other part, you then again break it down into two sets and search through that. So, we are not going into the details of those algorithms, the search algorithms, but it will be enough to know that because of the sorting that we have done, the lexicographical sorting, we can use a very efficient search process like binary search, which allows us to find these reads very quickly. Okay. So, what we do is then look for this and we find these are the suffixes that start with this GCG. Okay. And I have not discussed the search process itself, but because because of this sorting, it is a very efficient process. So, once we have found this, we can look at the locations, right. You have 4 and 8, and this is where this read actually occurs. So, if you remember, this read occurs at two places. This maps to multiple regions, and here we see them because they are mapping to two different positions, right. Two different suffixes starting from two different positions. So, this means this is a repeat sequence that is present in the reference genome. Okay. So, what are the advantages and drawbacks of suffix arrays, right. So, they take so the first advantage is that they take less space compared to suffix trees, and it is about 12 to 15 GB for human genome. Again, this is comparable to the hash table, right. And one of the things that also an advantage of this method, right, compared to hash table is that it can map reads to multiple positions or repeat sequences very easily, again because of the lexicographical sorting. But the problem remains, right. The drawback, major drawback is that it cannot map reads with mutations or sequencing errors, right. It is very poor at this kind of mapping. Okay. Again, we can think about some way of kind of overcoming this problem, but then again one of the issues we have seen is that the memory requirement is quite large, right. And I mean, this is the reason why we started looking for other algorithms, right, compared to hash table, because of the memory requirement. This kind of memory may not be available in normal desktop or laptops, right. So, this is one tool that actually uses this suffix array method, and I encourage you to go through the reference, and you can probably see how they are utilizing the suffix array based method for searching reads. So, here are the references that we have used for this class. Now, to summarize, we have talked about the suffix trees and suffix arrays, and we have talked about first the suffixes, right. So, you understand how we can generate suffixes from a reference string, and we have talked about the suffix array data structure and suffix tree data structure. And what we have seen, suffix trees and suffix arrays, they enable really fast mapping. Because of this structure, you can search reads very quickly. Okay. However, what we have seen, suffix tree actually takes a lot of memory and space, and in case of human genome, this is about 30 to 35 GB, right. So, if you have to use that much of RAM, you cannot run it on a normal desktop computer. You have to use a dedicated server or a computational server. Suffix arrays, they actually address this issue to some extent, right. They reduce the memory requirement, but also keep the property of fast mapping because of this lexicographical sorting. So, we have discussed this, right. So, suffix trees require a lot of space, memory, and this is reduced in case of suffix arrays. And what we have seen, the strength lies is that suffix trees and suffix arrays, they can map reads to multiple positions with ease. So, if you have a read and that is mapping to multiple positions or that come from repeat sequences in the genome, then this kind of structure is very useful for a quick mapping. Okay. And this is something that will come up very often if you are looking at human genome or other genomes, like higher eukaryotes or mammalian genomes. You will see a lot of repeat sequences present, okay, and you will get reads from these repeat regions, and during the mapping process you will probably have to map them to multiple locations or identify these locations where these reads might come from. Okay. And in that case, if you are using hash table, it takes a lot of time, right. It will increase the time requirement substantially, and in those cases suffix tree and suffix array can help a lot, right. So, you have seen in suffix tree you have these overlapping path, right, that is generated in case of repeat sequences. So you just search through one single path and you identify all the positions where this read can map to. Okay. In suffix arrays, because of the lexicographical sorting, it is again very easy, right. You will have multiple suffixes where you will find this read, but they are, because of the sorting, they will be very close to each other and you can find them very easily. So this is the biggest strength of these methods. But what we have seen that these methods are very poor at mapping reads that contain mismatches, right, or so these mismatches could be generated because of mutations in the read or the sample that you are working with, or because of the sequencing errors that happen during the sequencing process, right. So they cannot really handle this kind of reads, they cannot map those reads. But of course, we have also talked about some alternatives, right, where we can actually come up with certain methods that can allow this kind of mapping. But given the limitation, right, for example, the memory and space requirement, this is something that has not been worked upon that much, because what we want at the end is a method that is fast, right. This can handle this kind of mapping to multiple repeats positions, right, but also does not take too much space or memory, right. So we should be able to do this mapping process in a normal desktop or laptop computer, right. That is the goal, and that is why we have not kind of gone in this direction, where we are adapting the suffix tree or suffix array based methods for mapping reads with mutations or sequencing errors. So in the next class, we will talk about certain methods that can actually kind of do all of these, but with very low memory requirement. Thank you.